All right, so this is the second part of the video for social psychology, and we're going to start talking about attitudes. So, an attitude is, by definition, down here, positive, negative, or mixed feelings based on your beliefs that predispose us to respond in a particular way to objects, people, and events. So, basically, predispose means you are more likely to do something because of your past or because of who you are or what you've been through, stuff like that. You're predisposed to many of you Latino, Mexican food because we live in a culture where it's very dominant. You might grew up with it. That's what predisposition means. You might be predisposed to be Republican or Democrat. You might be predisposed to lots of things. You might be predisposed to believe a person's a bad person, like the example on the bottom, because someone else tells you about that person. So there are three parts of this that you need to know: cognitive, affective, and behavioral. Those are your attitude. You have an attitude, and the attitude has three parts. Cognitive means what you believe. Affective is how you feel about what you believe. Does it upset you? Does it make you happy or sad? Or how does that belief make you feel? And then behavioral is what are you willing to do about it? How does it change your behavior? So example I have for a picture of Coke versus Pepsi. What do you believe? You believe that Coke is better because that's what you grew up with as a kid. In the South, everybody calls it Coke. No matter what you want to order, they ask you what kind of Coke do you want. They mean Pepsi, they mean Mountain Dew, they mean Dr. Pepper, but they say Coke. So what you believe is you believe Coke is better. How do you feel about it? You feel that, this is a little bit of a stretch on this one, but you feel that Coke is the better brand. You feel like it tastes better. You feel like it makes you happy to drink it. You feel sad when you have to pick Pepsi instead. Those feelings that come with that belief. And the behavioral is how do those cognitive and affective ideas and things in your head affect what you're going to do? Meaning, obviously, if you go to a store and you have both options, what are you going to pick? You're going to pick Coke. Advertisers spend lots of money on changing your beliefs and what you want to have. You might decide to have Pepsi because you just saw a recent Pepsi commercial and they had the Pepsi vanilla or Pepsi cherry vanilla or whatever new Pepsi they have. I think they have orange vanilla, I think is what they have right now. And you might want to try that because, is that Coke? Whatever. You might try the new brand because this ad you saw, and that changes your cognitive belief about the brand, which changes how you feel about choosing it, and which changes what you're going to do. So why is this in social psychology? Because your attitudes affect your choices, which affect other people. Your attitudes can affect other people's attitudes, because if you think something is bad and you know you're going to get in trouble for it because other people think it's bad, then you won't do it because you know their attitudes would tell you not to. Their beliefs and actions would tell you it was bad. So here's the example at the bottom is a better one. A friend tells you that they believe Coach Stove is a mean teacher. You may feel dislike for Coach Stove, and then you act unfriendly. So you have these three parts: belief, feelings about it, and then how you act. Those are your attitudes. So then stop at this time. So here's where this comes into play in social psych. If there is no outside influence on what you want to do, you do whatever aligns to your attitude. You do what you believe, feel, and then your actions, obviously, the attitude, what happens in the end. But your beliefs and your feelings are how you act on everything. If you think stealing isn't that bad of an idea, isn't that bad of a thing, if you were raised that way, or it doesn't matter because you're stealing from the rich or you're stealing from somebody who doesn't really need it, you're going to do it. But if you're then afraid of the consequences, you're afraid of how other people would see you, or afraid of people getting caught, or there's other people around you, other people, the outside influencers, will change what you do. Their attitudes change your attitude, because attitude is partly on how you act. Someone else's attitude affects your attitude, and which brings us to some attitudes that you may have that will be detrimental to your what you would do in a crowd, basically. So we don't have an explanation for some things. If we don't have an explanation for something, it's because we don't need to explain it to other people. I don't need to explain to you why I had ramen noodles today, or I decided to sleep in till 10, because there was nobody that it was going to affect. I didn't sleep in at 10, but I did have ramen noodles a day, but it doesn't affect anybody else. So I made those decisions based off my attitude solely. But I'm a teacher and I couldn't sleep until 10 because I needed to get some stuff done for you guys. So I stuck with that role that I'm in. We're going to talk about that in a second. And I also stuck with the attitude that I knew would best benefit you guys, because I wasn't the only person affected by me sleeping in today. And here we are. Which brings us to how attitudes affect your action, especially in public places. So we're going to watch this video. It might be demonetized, or not, so it's the YouTubers. I'm not monetized anyways, but it might be flagged for copyright because it's a video of another video inside my video. But on that other end, it's a news article, so it should be easy to use. I'm using it for education purposes, so I hope this is okay. I'm not using it to make money. I'm just using it for education for you guys. So de-individuation, one of my favorite things to talk about. It's super interesting to study. This video will make a good example of it. It's losing your individuality, losing your sense of self, losing who you are in a group, in a crowd, meaning you do something that you normally wouldn't have done because there's everybody else around you is doing it, or it's just what's happening around you, what is okay to do in that scenario. It's not doing something because there's so many people that you're not going to get caught. That's completely separate. De-individuation is not doing something because you're worried about getting caught, not worried about being caught because there's a lot of people. It's doing something because everybody else around you is doing it, and it's just being part of the crowd. It's basically, the other word for this is called the mob mentality, which leads to riots, which we're going to talk. It says pack mentality here drives a riot. That's what that is. When people talk about mob mentality or pack mentality, it's when it's talking about psychology, we call it de-individuation. Doing something because other people around you are doing it because it's what's going on. And you're going to see here that these people could be easily caught. They're all on camera. If someone can identify them, they can be caught. But they didn't start it. The people that started it, they might have done it because they knew they weren't going to get caught. But everybody else that kept doing it is now doing it because they saw other people do it. And then there's also role playing, which we'll talk about with Phillips and Bardo. You play a role. I play a role as a teacher. You play a role as students. And we change our attitudes and our behaviors based off the role we are in. And watch this video for quick.
So who is responsible for what happened last night? Was it anarchists masquerading as Canucks fans, as the Vancouver police said today? The troublemakers did start it, but the people who stayed and watched and cheered are not without blame themselves. There were lessons learned and lessons apparently forgotten in the 1994 Vancouver Stanley Cup riot. A large crowd in a confined space with a common purpose that was snatched away. Throw in the anonymity of a uniform and add alcohol. A Victoria social psychologist says that is a recipe for a riot. Mary Beth Burton reports.
Thousands of disappointed fans watched the Vancouver Canucks Stanley Cup dream vanish. And even before the final buzzer sounded, violence erupted on downtown Vancouver streets. Police believe anarchists and other criminals sparked the riots.
Sure, there's some people who probably went down there with the explicit purpose of engaging in bad behavior. But most people who are in that type of circumstance are going to fall prey to mob behavior in some way.
Dr. Stinson says there were active and more passive rioters. A few people flipped and torched the 15 vehicles, but many, many more cheered them on. Others kicked and stomped when the damage was mostly done. More still posed for pictures around the devastation and fueled the madness. Dr. Stinson says losing self-awareness is the first step to rioting. Add alcohol and the inhibitions disappear.
And we lose that sense of caring what other people think of us. And when that happens, we lose any inhibitions we might have had that might have kept us behaving as civil, good members of society. And so more kind of primal instincts might come out.
The instinct to knock over public porta potties, even with some people inside. The instinct to smash windows with no regard for the cost of cleanup. It was as baffling to some last night as it is to most today.
But somebody lose, somebody win. He has nothing to do with the business, with the people of the downtown.
The destructive behavior wasn't limited to inanimate objects. Fistfights were commonplace. People were stabbed. This person dangled over a busy intersection. 100 arrests were made.
It's embarrassing. I wish we'd grow up a little. Definitely.
So what you saw there was people who were rioting in the streets and who were really just being part of what the crowd was doing. They were all basically just cheering. People were cheering on, or just as a fault as everybody else. That's de-individuation. The people that started it might not have been de-individuation, but at some point, even the people breaking the glass and flipping over party parties in cars, that's de-individuation. They're not worried about getting caught. That's not what they're worried about. They're just being part of the crowd. They're just doing what everybody else is doing. Where in a normal scenario, they would never do those things. Some of those people might never have destroyed property or stolen things or broken things before, but now they are because of the crowd. And that's one of the reasons that we don't have the arguments for not having a popular vote system for our president, is because of what's called the mob mentality, is that the majority will always win and the minority will always lose, meaning if the majority is always Democrat, we'll always have a Democratic president forever, Democrat president forever, or liberal president. And if the minority always loses, then all the people who believe in a Republican or less liberal leaning president will never get a president or someone who is a part of their beliefs, and they feel ostracized, and that's where a divide happens that is not healthy for a nation. That's one of the reasons for it. I'm not arguing for it or against it, I'm just saying that's one of the reasons. And then you have Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, where you had prison guards and prisoners and Philip Zimbardo, the warden, where they were all put into these roles, which goes back to this role playing here, where they took on these roles so heavily, even though they're all college students, just playing doing a study. The prisoners started to try to stage a revolt and a riot, and the guards were hazing the prisoners, and it just got out of control really quickly. It was supposed to only go for 2 weeks, and then it just blew out of proportion. So what's wrong there is the fact that when we are told to take on a role, we will do what we think that role is supposed to have. If I'm a teacher, I take on the role of what a teacher's supposed to be, what I learned, what I grew up seeing teachers do. So that's what I started doing. And that's why it's hard for teachers, especially older teachers, to change and to adapt to things like what we're doing right now. Because they grew up in a way, and the role they've been filling as a teacher for 20 years suddenly changed, and it makes it very difficult on them. So that's where roles come into play for attitudes. Your attitude changes based off the roles you have as a student, teacher, prison guard, or rioter, or whatever else it is. There's a related phenomenon called the risky shift. The tendency for people to take greater risks when they are part of a group than they would as individuals acting on their own. So that's part of the de-individuation, where some of those people would never have done that stuff until they were in that scenario with all these other people doing the same thing. That's called the risky shift. And that leads to some other really, really neat things. And there's some great videos on this, but maybe I'll just upload them and put links in the teams where this will be. So bystander effect. You've probably heard about this before. So you are less likely to help others when in groups than when alone. So there's an example, and I think I did videos of this with you guys before, but I might not have. There's a video of a homeless man or someone playing a homeless man lying on the street in pain, making these sounds like, I'm hurting, stuff like that. And during the busiest times, they are ignored the most. During the less busy times, when there's less people around, less people walking by, you are less likely to also walk by. When there's more people just walking by, you're just going to do what everybody else is doing, just ignoring them. Basically, an easy example is someone gets a flat tire on the road. If you are out in the country and someone drives by, you're more likely to get help than if you are on the busy highway. Because everybody else is doing it, you just keep driving by. But there is a lot of studies and a lot of people who disagree with this, and they say that people aren't horrible like that. That just because there's a crowd doesn't mean people are going to be horrible. If there's more people, it's likely that one of those people is likely going to help. And you will see that in that video, if I can find it, of the person on the sidewalk. As well, you have to think about the scenarios. When there's more people, especially if you're talking about the driving scenario, if you're on the I-10 or the 101 and there's people driving 70 miles per hour and there's no place to pull over and get off the road safely and get out of your vehicle safely, which you're not supposed to do even if you get an accident on the highway, never get out of your vehicle until the cops get there. You're less likely to do that because you're afraid of getting hurt yourself. So the bystander effect has other things going into play here, but it is important to talk about because it does have some truth to it. Then there's social loafing, which is something you guys have all done before. All of these come into play when you have to do group projects. Social loafing. Individuals produce less work and reduce efficiency and effort when working in groups than by themselves. Diffusion of responsibility helps explain both. What does that mean? Well, diffusion of responsibility is when in a group, what is the first thing that usually you do? I'll do the PowerPoint, you look for the data, you write the essay, and you present. You have 4 people and each of you pick a certain thing. So what you do is you create an opportunity for yourself to do less work. And when that happens, you actually work less efficiently because you can stall a little bit. You have less work to do. Oh, it's all split out. I'll be good if I don't do this right away. And what happens is someone might be the social loaf of the group. They might be less likely to do anything. And there's always someone in the group who doesn't do anything. And that sucks, but that's just a reality of the situation of doing group projects in school and working in a group in life. In life, it's a little bit easier because you can say, I made this product myself and you don't get any of the benefits from the money, or you're going to get fired because you didn't do anything, or whatever else it is. So it might be a little bit easier in life. There's an example here of tug of war. The people who circled here, you can see that these 2 people right here are basically social loafing. They're all supposed to be working together, but these 2 aren't working nearly as hard. He's more worried about behind him. He looks like he's a lot of slack here. These 2 right here are putting in a lot of work. You can see them leaning back, putting their knees into it. But these 3 are basically social loafs. And this picture up here is the bystander effect. People just walking by this homeless person asking for money. Then there's 2 things that really come into play when you're talking about trials. There's another one that comes in here too. Can't remember what it is, but like when you're doing a trial to convict a murderer. So there's 2. These are really important: group polarization and group think. Group polarization is when a group discussion leads to a more polarized point of view by the group. So you're having a conversation. Let's say you're trying to convict somebody of a crime, theft, grand larceny. I don't know. They stole something at gunpoint. Everybody believes the person did it. What you're discussing now is what should the crime be. We recommend what should the punishment be. We recommend guilty in the 1st degree, guilty in the 2nd degree, whatever the crime is, or maybe it's go from grand larceny, I think it's larceny, down to just theft or burglary, something that's a lesser crime with a lesser sentence. That's what you recommend for the judge. Group polarization is when you all think the person did it, and then through discussion, you all become more polarized and think, you know what, this person really was grand larceny, and this person deserves the maximum sentence. That's group polarization. It can also be that there's 2 sides of the group, and through conversation, both sides separate even more, which is what happens in our political party. People don't talk to each other and discuss politics in order to understand the other side and to come closer together and work together. No, they discuss their point to make their point, and the other person is ignoring them until they can make their point, and then they become more polarized as the discussion leads on because neither one can come to an agreement, and they all just want the other person to believe their side, and then it gets pretty aggressive from there. Groupthink is often much worse. When we feel pressure to conform to the group and we stop critical thinking, this is horribly written, stops critical thinking to avoid dissension in the group. So what happens there is this person, so this is a good example, I guess. And we are firmly opposed to any form of groupthink. And everybody says, right, JB, right, JB, right, JB, right, JB, right, JB. And everybody is group thinking. They just go with what they said. So in a trial, you have a foreman who is the leader and who does all the talk, does all the decision making, and speaks to the judge, usually. And if, let's say, that person, you all trust that person, you believe that person, he's a doctor or whatever. So your attitude and your belief about that person then makes you believe that what they say is true. You're like, you know what? I never thought about that way. I'm just going to go with what you said. More likely, though, it'll be that one person or a couple people don't believe it and don't have enough information and say, I don't know if we can convict this person. I don't know if it's enough information. But instead of saying your piece and saying your opinion, you just go along with the group and say, you know what? Everybody else believes it. It must be right. Let's convict the person. And now the person goes to jail because you didn't say your opinion and that person could have gone free. Maybe it's right. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're wrong. But there needs to be some discussion, and groupthink is not healthy. There's some talk about, we'll talk about Kennedy here in a second, and then the Bay of Pigs. I believe Kennedy is an example I don't have off the top of my head. But moving on because we're running out of time. So here's an example. So here's conformity, which is sort of like groupthink. So it's yielding to social pressure. So here's an example of Ash's line test, which you do need to know. So subjects often conform to a group even when the group states clearly inaccurate conclusions. Conformity to a group increases with the size of the group up to 5 or 6, but only when the group's unanimous in its beliefs. So here's the example, and there's some videos for this as well. You are shown picture Exhibit 1 here. And then you're shown another picture, Exhibit 2, side by side. Not necessarily side by side, but separated far enough that you have to look back and forth to look at both of them. And what they do is they say, look at Exhibit 1, and then from Exhibit 2, from the pictures in Exhibit 2, which line is the same size? And they will test people, and they will say, they'll have 5 to 6 people in front of for you. They're all plants. They are all Confederates in the study, which means they're planted. They are part of this. They're not part of the study. You are the only person who doesn't know what's going on. And everybody in front of you will say, C's the same size, C's the same size, C's the same size. And then when it finally gets to you, you know which one of those is correct. A. You know A is correct, but you might say C, and you'd say you wouldn't, but you might say C because everybody else in front of you said it, and you don't want to look dumb. So you say C. Some people still will say A, but it's about a 60%, and it increases to about that maximum with 5 to 6 people. If there's only 1 or 2 people in front of you, you might just say what it is because it's obviously A, because of what you know is true is not been influenced by 2 or 3 people. You need a large group of people to influence your decision. So this example, which opposed them, had effect on the subject. So this is the percent of errors based off the number of people who disagreed with them. So the more people who disagree with you, the more likely you are to have errors. Up to, again, around 7 or 8 right here where it maxed out. But down here, the errors are very, very low because there's only a couple people disagreeing with you. Here's the example. If it plays a video.
Would you rather stand alone and be right, or follow the group and be wrong? The answer might seem obvious, but the truth just may surprise you.
The rules of this game are simple. Over here, we've drawn a line. And over here, we've drawn 3 lines. A, B, and C. Only one of these 3 lines is an exact match for the first line. Can you figure out which one it is? Got it? Did you say B? Simple enough, right? Or is it? Try one more round with a different version that we're showing our volunteers.
You've got to decide which one of these 3 straight lines is the same length as this first card.
So, Where do you stand on this one? A, B, or C? Before you decide, take a look at what our volunteers picked.
What's your choice?
It's A.
You think it's A?
I think so.
Okay, go to A. A. A.
It's A. Definitely A.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going with A.
Okay.
The answer seems obvious, right? Or is it? Take one last look. Are you going with these people who all picked A? Or did you choose to go with B or C? Time's up. Got your pick?
It's A.
You're gonna go with the group.
Yeah.
All right.
So as you see here, they went with a group. She went with a group. And there's some other people that didn't go with the group. It just really depends on who you are and how confident you are. Which goes with the Milgram shock test a little bit. Where are we at? I need to go so much faster. Anyways, this video's over. That's pretty much it for most, I think, Module 74, but I'm not quite on track for those. So thank you guys for watching the next one. Bye.